Welcome to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping Orange County. With your host, Don Camber.
Hello, live from the OC Talk Radio studios at UCI's Beal Applied Innovation Center. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Don Camber with another great guest impacting positively someone in our community. Today, I welcome Second Chance Orange County CEO Deb Johnson. The organization helps low-income individuals recovering from drug and alcohol addiction or experiencing homelessness adjust back into society by providing free job skills training. She started the organization after becoming aware of the devastating effect that drug addiction and homelessness were having on the Orange County community. She's a former Tustin City Council member serving between 2008 and 2012. Thank you, Deb, for being on Impact OC.
Thank you, Don, so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Deb, please explain what prompted you to get involved.
Well, it's interesting. I never in a million years, Don, thought I'd be in social services. Never, ever, ever. What ended up happening was I was a bank consultant for 18 years. And after being on the city council, I moved to New York and I went to Columbia Grad School. And in my grad school, everyone there in my nonprofit class said, you have to start a nonprofit. And I kept saying, no, no, no. Well, they convinced me. I tried to get 2 other nonprofits to allow me to open up in Orange County and LA without success. So what I did was, I said, I'll start it myself. So with really no experience, with nothing, I used my own money and I started it. And why I picked specifically this area and this arena, because it's not the easiest one to do, and it's because there was a gap. Nobody was helping these folks actually get the jobs. So I used my business acumen and my connections and my sales skills to get people jobs. But actually, it's deeper than that. I think what makes it different and why I did it is because I have a child who suffers with addiction and homelessness, sadly enough. And I think I'm probably one of the very few CEOs of any nonprofits that does what I do for the passion to help other people, because I really can't help my son. So instead of wallowing in self-pity and being depressed about it, I decided to help everyone else's kids, because my son is very difficult. And when I teach and when I help the people, they really listen because they understand I'm doing it for the right reasons. And that's really been very, very effective. So it keeps me motivated. It keeps me inspired. It brings me joy. And I guess this was the plan all along. I just never knew. It's not really why I went back to grad school, but it was the place I was supposed to be.
So talk about the connection between your organization and your son.
Well, what ended up happening is what's interesting about starting this is I knew what the gap was. And I first started it helping his friends and him get jobs. And it's not easy, because this population, if it was easy, they wouldn't be on the streets. We wouldn't have this problem. So for the first year, I helped him and his friends get jobs. And I wanted to prove proof of concept that I could actually be effective. And I did. And then from that point on, I realized, wow, this is really different. No one's doing it. And I actually started Second Chance Orange County. We started actually when the Bridges Kramer shelter opened up, which is in Anaheim, which is a county shelter. That was the first place that we went. And what we found is everyone wanted to be there. It became very popular. In fact, they had started limiting the number of people. I go, wow, I never thought it'd be so popular with the homeless people. But I think what ended up happening, it was really good training. The training that I provide is the same training I was teaching banks for over 18 years. So I told them, this is really good training that you couldn't necessarily get unless I decided to be in this field. So we give them the skills at the shelter. And then if they want full service, if they want job placements, if they want clothes, if they want additional services, the shelter provider has to write a referral to give it to us.
So talk about your services.
So there's several things that we do. We only help people that have a place to sleep. So we take referrals from shelters, but only certain ones that we're working with. And what we provide is some of the classes we teach at the shelters are change management, interviewing skills, customer service skills, improvisation skills, which usually throws people. Why am I teaching improv? I wasn't acting, and I realized that the homeless people really needed the skill to adapt to the harassment they get and how to use humor instead of using their fists to fight when they get confronted by people that are being strong or mean to them. And it's actually helped a lot of people. They love it. In fact, I'm teaching improvisation in 2 weeks at one of the shelters because that's what they want me to teach. They go, Deb, they need you. Okay, so that's one of the things
So
we do.
you teach them in shelters.
I teach in shelters, yes.
So if someone's couch surfing and considered homeless, that wouldn't qualify.
No, the only way we can work with people is they either can be referred, they could be referred from a client if they're in recovery. So there's a couple of requirements. They either have to be in recovery for at least a month, and or they have to be homeless. But if they're in a homeless shelter and they're still using drugs, they can attend the classes, but they can't be full service because we can't place them in a job if they're using drugs. So they have to be 30 days at least sober.
Why is homelessness and addiction problems seem to be getting worse?
So it really goes down to, in my opinion, it goes down to, people said, why is homelessness increasing? I don't think it's a homelessness problem from doing this for 8 years and from living with it. It's really an addiction and mental illness problem. So I think we need to re-identify what the problem is. If we look, and I actually did statistical analysis, one of the benefits of going to grad school was learning statistics again, was we did statistical analysis of all the people we helped. And we went through to see how many of them are felons, how many of them are physically disabled, how many of them are mentally disabled, how many of them are drug addicts. So between these, we found most of them had at least 2 or 3 conditions. They were felons, they were mentally ill, the drug addictions. Those were probably the 3 most common, with the mental illness and the addiction being the strongest. So what ends up happening is drug addicts get arrested because they're self-medicating and they're using drugs, and then they get picked up by the police or the sheriff's department and they go to jail for having a meth pipe or having a syringe, and then it just self-perpetuates. The addiction is stronger than anything you can imagine. If I had to give up dark chocolate, I'd be in trouble. One of the things I've realized, and I tell the clients, is what you have to do is harder than anything we'll do at Second Chance Orange County. You have to stay sober. You have to choose every day not to use drugs or alcohol. That's the hardest thing. If you keep doing that, we will do everything in our power to get you a job. We'll get you clothes. We'll get you a ride. We'll help you to try to find someone to fix your car. We'll teach you how to save money so you get out of the shelter. But you have to stay sober. And if they do relapse, which could happen, they have to tell us that we relapsed. Okay, we'll give you a second chance. They have to stay sober for another period of time, and we'll take them back again.
Thus, that's how you came up with the name.
Well, I came up with the name Second Chance Orange County, actually, because I think everyone deserved a second chance. I didn't even think ahead that it would be they would relapse. Being a little naive about it, I didn't realize how many of the clients would actually relapse. I thought, well, once we get them a job, everything will be fine. But if it was that easy, there would be other people and nonprofits doing it. Probably one of the biggest challenges we have is we get somebody a job, Don. So they have a job and they show up for the job and they get scared. So they walk in, the employer has told me they're going to hire this person, and then they completely walk out the door. And then the employer will text me and I'll text back because he just left. He'll call the person and say, listen, come back here, Stephen. We'll hire you. He goes, no, I don't want to work here. Their anxiety is so high that here we have a job for them. This is not the first time. This happens very frequently. Sometimes we have to have our staff or our volunteers go with them on these interviews, and I've done it because they're so anxious and they don't know how to handle it if somebody different shows up, or they look around and they feel like, well, they're the only one of this race here. Even though the employer has told me no matter what, I will hire your people because I know you're watching them. I know what you're doing is working. And so the obstacles are humongous with this population. The mental illness is very severe.
So give us some examples of stories of some of your clients.
So I'll give you a couple good stories. So one of the good stories is a woman from Santa Ana. And Anna was incredible. She hadn't worked, I don't know if anybody remembers this, any of your listeners remember a store called Zodi's? I barely remember it. I remember Gemco. Zodi's was before Gemco, before Target. That's the last time she worked. The woman had no teeth. We worked with her for 6 months trying to get her a job. We got her a job at North Italia in Irvine. And I say that because they've hired several of our clients. And she cleans the silverware and she cleans and polishes the glasses. And she's worked there for over 3 years. She's no longer in the shelter. She has an apartment. The employer had made a testimonial for us saying she is one of the best employees they've ever had. And they continue to hire our employees. So that's a really good success story. Another one is a woman that I met at a shelter, at a different shelter in South County. And she told me when she met me, she goes, I want to work for you one day. And I said, okay, well, we got a lot to do now. She was a meth addict. She goes, that's my goal. I said, you have to stay sober. That's the most important thing. She goes, okay. So one of the requirements is if they have to stay sober, they have to show us their chips from the AA meetings that they've been sober 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Well, I have good news. She's been sober 2 years. I have her chip. She's now taught, I think, 3 or 4 of our classes for us. She makes $90,000 a year. She's sober. She's working. She's saved over $9,000. That's a very good success story.
Now, do you have staff and do you have volunteers? How does this
Mostly it's volunteers. The volunteers help at the shelter. So when we're teaching at a shelter, we usually have 2 volunteers because the paperwork is very extensive that we have to do to take the clients in because we have HUD grants. HUD grants are federal grants that are given to cities and then cities monitor them and give them to us. For example, like the city of Santa Ana. We work for the city of Irvine. We work for both Costa Mesa, Newport Beach. We've gotten grants from different cities.
How's your son doing?
Probably not a good subject.
Okay, moving on.
I mean, I'm smiling, but it's probably not a good subject. I think I have had apples dropped on my head so hard that apple juice doesn't work for me now. It doesn't agree with me. But instead of just getting dents on my head, I decided to do something about it. Besides doing this, I actually wrote a book.
I was going to say, you wrote a memoir.
I wrote a memoir.
Yeah.
So I wrote a memoir. It's called Keep Walking, Young Lady. And you're probably asking, why is it called that? It's interesting. It's kind of, really the truth is somebody on the street when I was going to Columbia, New York, somebody was screaming into the phone to somebody. A Russian man was screaming into the phone. And I just looked at him. I was walking on Park Avenue towards Grand Central to meet with a bank at a bank appointment, and he goes, keep walking, young lady. And that stuck with me so much that when I was struggling in New York to get through school, just to survive, knowing my son was homeless on the streets and I'm in New York going to grad school, I knew just to keep moving forward. What's the next step? And the next step usually was to study, to find work, which I tried to do, to move forward. I think my memoir will help any parents of kids that are either addicts or experiencing homelessness on how to deal with it, how not to enable them, how to understand it and to move forward. Because I thought my life would be a merry-go-round. It's really a roller coaster. At some points in time, my son does very well, and he's worked for our organization. He was sober for 15 months. He has periods of times where he does well, and he has a place to live, and he saves money, and he has everything. But again, it's interesting. The mental illness and the addiction are stronger than anything you can ever believe, because even when they have everything, I always tell people that drug is working out 24/7, and if they have a moment where they slip, that drug is going to attract them again.
How are they getting the drugs?
The drugs are really cheap. The most popular drug when I started was heroin. So when we started this 8 years ago, it was heroin. And that was the most popular one. And they end up begging to get money. So I always tell people, don't give the homeless people money because you could be killing them. And I mean that seriously. You can give them cigarettes. Great. They moved to speed. And then fentanyl is very cheap because it's being manufactured. I always wish that there was no drugs. Like, if there was no drugs, then there would be no place to go. And I always say, if they couldn't find drugs, or if my son couldn't find drugs for 7 days, like if everybody looked and there was no drugs out there, they would detox off the drugs. But they always can find them. So if they couldn't find them, if there was a better mental health capability to help the people with mental health illness, and they couldn't find drugs, and they took their prescription medicine, and we were better at hiring felons and gave them a second chance, I think we would really do a much better job of solving the problem of homelessness.
What are the demographics of the people you serve?
It's interesting. We only serve people that are over 18. It seems like most of the clients we have now, because we keep statistical analysis, are over 50. Which is interesting. We're getting jobs for people that are 50, 60, 65, which is really shocking. I think it's easier when we first started that a lot of the homeless people and the people on drugs were younger. They were easier to get jobs for. It's more difficult as they get older because they have more coexisting conditions. For example, they have physical disabilities, they have more mental disabilities. The longer people have been on drugs, it affects them. They have to be off drugs for quite a long period of time for you not to see the effects of it.
And how long will you work with a particular client?
We'll work with them for a year, which means if they want to get a raise, we'll teach them how to get a raise, how to ask for the raise. We'll continue to get them better jobs if they're sober and they're willing. During COVID, we went back and called every single client that we had helped and asked them, what is your most urgent need now? And we got them whatever it was. They go, I need this. All right. I felt like Santa Claus. Seriously. I'm like, okay, you need food. For the first time ever, we were going to the store. I was sending people off to go to the store to get food. Somebody needed a dresser. They needed backpacks for their kids for school. Somebody needed internet access. So at that point in time, I went to the board of directors and said, let's just do what's right, because the worst thing for us is to work so hard to help these people and then through no fault of their own, because of COVID, have them go back to experience homelessness. We paid rent for a couple of people. We did everything. I just remember that we just used everything we can to help them because a lot of them were not working. So here we got them a job and they're forced to stay home. And we don't want them to be kicked out of their place.
What kind of jobs were you able to get them?
Well, we end up getting people different jobs. So it's not like we have a whole stack of them. It depends on the person. So we really have to look at how severe their mental illness is. If they're really severely mentally ill, we can't help them. We helped somebody that was probably, nobody had ever helped her before. She had, I don't remember the name, but a rare one. It was very difficult, but we got her a job, for example, working at Urban Plates, cleaning up the tables. We can get them jobs at Busboys. We have to be careful, though. If they work in a restaurant and they're an alcoholic, that might not be the right place. They might need to work in an office environment. They might need to work in a warehouse. We seem to do well with people working in the back of restaurants, like they can be cooks, they can be chefs. We've gotten people jobs at car washes. We've gotten people construction jobs, really a variety of jobs. It really depends on their experience.
What are the biggest misconceptions people have about homelessness?
I think people believe that people choose to be homeless. That's just what they want. And I don't believe that. I think what ends up happening is they get comfortable with living a life on the edge, and their cortisol levels get used to that. It's the fight and flight that allows them to live. And I have one sad story. It was a client that was a heroin addict for a long time, and we helped him. He just really wanted it, and we helped him, and he got a job, and he got out of the shelter, and he was housed. And the shelter provider hated to leave me this message, but as soon as he got housed, he died, and he didn't overdose. His body just shut down. And they knew that would be really hard on me. The shelter knew it would be hard on me because I really liked him a lot, and I really wanted him to be successful. And they swore that he did not die of an overdose. His body was just so used to fear and flight that when he had everything, his body shut down. He was, I'm going to say, early 50s. So I don't think sometimes there's just nothing we can do. They get used to it. But I think if they had an alternate plan, once we get them a job, once we teach them to save, once they have a place to live, and if they're on the correct medicines, if they keep going to AA or NA meetings, we kind of have what's worked for us is being consistent on that. It seems to work. We've had enough people that it works. I wish I could say that everyone that we help has a success story. Believe me, I wish. But there's so many people that have told me that we've saved their lives by helping them. We've written to judges to get people's kids back because they were in our program. And we were drug testing them. One gentleman said he would have been put away. He had more meth in his car than anybody should have. Was going to be put away for 8 years. We wrote a letter to the judge saying he's in a program. We're watching him. He's staying sober, and he didn't go to jail. He got sober. He saved money. He now owns a bed and breakfast in Italy.
Well, how can people reach out to you?
Well, probably the best thing to do is we don't take referrals from anyone. And what ends up happening is people say, oh, help me, I have an uncle. The best thing to do is, I think, we only can take referrals, so that's a hard one, so no one can help. If people want to volunteer or if people want to donate to us, which we definitely need funding because we don't get funding from the county, for example, is they can go to our website, www.secondchanceoc.org, and there's a place where they can contribute or they can write to us.
Thank you, Second Chance Orange County CEO Deb Johnson, for being on Impact OC. And I thank everyone for tuning in. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Dawn Camber. Have an impactful day.
You've been listening to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping our community. Right here on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio.